We continue now at the top of Daf Samech Aleph Amid Beis Meseches Pesachim. This is Pesachim Daf 61b. The Gemara asks, Shachtu lemulin, what if a person shechs the Korban Pesach for people who have a bris milah, but it's al minas sheyischapru bo harelim bizrika. It's on condition that the people who do not have a bris milah, they should also get a kapara at the time that you're doing the sprinkling. Rashi over here says, Shachtu lahachilo lemulin menuyin. You shechted it in order to give it to eat to people who have a bris milah who are appointed over the carbon. But then you have in mind that when you do the zrika, arelim, or people who are not appointed, they should, whether they're appointed or not, but if they're arelim, they should get the kapara. What's the halach in that case? Does that passel the fact that you have in mind that the zrika should go on people who do not have a bris milah? Rav Chisda Amar Pasel. Rav Chisda says that's a problem, it's pasel. Rabba Amar kosher. Rabba says it's kosher. Rav Chisda Amar Pasel. Rav Chisda says pasel yesh machsheves arelim bizrika, because the machsheva that you have, the machshava, the thought that you have for the sprinkling of the blood for arelim is considered substantial, and therefore it creates a psul. Rabba Amar kosher. Rabba says it's kosher. Ein machsheves arelim bizrika. That's not considered a substantial machshava, and therefore it doesn't pasel. And Rashi says, Ein machsheves arelim bizrika lo mahan yolifsol. It's not considered a substantial enough machshava in order to pasel. V'tayim mefarish l'kamei. The reason's going to be explained later on. And so the Gemara continues, Amar Rabba. Rabba says, Minoa minolo. Where can I prove to you my position? Again, Rabba said that if you have in mind the arelim, the people who do not have a bris milah for the zrika, it's not going to be problematic. How do I know that by the zrika, that kind of machshava is irrelevant? We learn it from the following brisa. The Tanya that we learned in a brisa. Yachol yifsol b'nei chabura haboinimo. I might think that, let's say you have other people who come along with him who are arelim, so you have, let's say, people who have a bris milah, but you've also included a mixture, some people who have a bris milah and some people who don't. I might think that's a problem. Vidinu, and we should learn out that as follows. Hoel v'orla poselas. We know that orla is a problem by Korban Pesach. V'tuma poselas, and of course we know that a tuma is also, if you shecht it for people who are tamei, it's a problem by Korban Pesach. So ma tuma lo asaba mixas tuma kachol tuma. Now by tuma it's only a problem if everyone is tamei, but if part of the people that you're shechting for are tamei, it's not a problem. Af orla, so too we should say by orla. Lo asaba mixas orla kachol orla. We shouldn't say that just if some people are not circumcised, that's going to be a problem. No, it's only a problem if all of the people are arelim. If some of them are arelim, it's not a problem. That's one possible limud. Oklach l'derech zu, but the Brisa says maybe we should go the other direction. Hoel v'orla poselas. We know that orla pasels. Uzman posel, and if you have in mind to eat it past the proper time, that's also a psul. Mazman, just like if it's not the proper time, also but mixas man kechol azman. Even if part of it you had in mind, part of this Korban Pesach you had in mind, that's enough to pasel. Even if some of it was eaten in the proper time, but if I had in mind to eat part of it not in the proper time, that's going to be a problem. Af orla, so let's say the same thing by orla. Asaba miktsas orla kecharla orla. If even a portion of the people you have in mind when you're shechting the Korban Pesach are arelim, that should be a problem. So the Brisa says, Nira lemidoma. Well, we have to see which one is it more comparable to. Should we compare orla again to tuma, or should we say, no, it's more comparable to zman? So the Brisa says, Don in davar she'eno noeg b'chol azvachim, midavar she'eno noeg b'chol azvachim. We should learn out from something that doesn't apply to all karbanos, from something that doesn't apply to all karbanos. V'al yochiach zman she'noeg b'chol azvachim. The psul of having in mind the wrong time applies to all karbanos. So let's learn out from tuma, which is not something that applies by all karbanos. Oklach l'derech zu, or maybe we should go the other direction. Donin davar shelo huter mechlala. We should learn from something where there is no real heter. Midavar shelo huter mechlala, again from something where there is no real heter. V'al tochiach tuma. Don't learn out from tuma. Shehutra mechlala. Tuma sometimes we do allow by Korban Pesach. For example, if all of Klal Yisrael is tamei, they're allowed to bring the Korban Pesach betuma. So that's the question of the Brisa. Which one should we learn from? And Rashi over here says orla v'tuma. When it comes to psul of orla and psul of tuma, eina noheges b'shar zvachim kepesach. They don't have the same laws by other karbanos like Korban Pesach. That's with the commonality between them. Shekain oril v'tami, because we find by an oril or a tami mishalchin karbanos, they can send their karbanos to the Beis HaMikdash. Toloma akva b'hu achilas bailim. You don't have to. The bailim don't have to eat the carbon. That's not ma'akev. And arla lo hutra michlala. When it comes to arla, there's no heter. Shein shum carbon nechol arelim. Meaning, you never have a case where arelim can eat a carbon. The alfinan b'yavamas, the arl aser b'kadshim. It says in Yavamas, an arl can't eat kachim, dasi b'kal v'chomer, mi pesach akal. So we learned that out from a kal v'chomer. Uzman nami lo hutter l'shum carbon. We also don't find any time you have in mind the wrong time period to eat it. That's not allowed. La'ochlo chutz l'zmano, to eat it outside of the proper time. V'tumah hutter mechlala, but tumah we do find a heter. Kinim mefarish l'kamon, as we'll explain later on. HaPesach sheba b'tumah, nechal b'tumah. You can have a case of Korban Pesach which is brought, because let's say again all of Klal Yisrael, let's say, is tameh. That Korban Pesach can even be eaten b'tumah, so it's hutter mechlala. So in any case, the Bryce is not sure which direction to go. If you have partial arelim, is that a problem or not? Is it like Zman, it's going to be a problem? Is it like Tumah, it's not going to be a problem? And the Brisa ends off with a strange line. Talmud Lomar, Pasuk says, Zos. It says this. So the question is, what exactly is the Brisa saying? So this is Rabbah's reasoning. So Rabbah says, My Zos. What does the Brisa mean when it says Zos over here? If it means to say that we're learning from the word Zos, we're saying Zos Chukas HaPesach, only if all of them are arelim, it's a problem. But if some of them, it's not a problem. That's learned from the word Zos. That wouldn't make any sense. Haimi v'chol orel nafka, because that's already learned from v'chol. All arelim. It has to be that everyone you're shechting for is arelim. Otherwise, it's not a problem. So that can't be what the Zos is teaching. Elolav hachikatani. So rather, it must be that the Brisa means as follows. Talmud lomar v'chol orel. Really, we're learning from the word v'chol orel, kula orla pasla, miksasa lo pasla. That's where we learn out that everyone has to be arelim for it to be a problem. If some of the people you're shechting for are arelim, that's not a problem. That's not learned from Zos. That's learned from v'chol orel. V'chi tema, but then the Bryce is saying, if you're going to say, Hu adin lizrika, that maybe we should apply the psul of arelim to the sprinkling of the blood as well. To kula orla mi apasla, that if you did the zrika for all, entirely for arelim, that would be a problem. Maybe we should at least be strict in that regard. Talmud lomar Zos, that's what we learn from the pasuk of Zos, meaning this, b'shchitahu, only when it comes to the slaughtering process at the time of shchita, to kula orla miha pasla. Then we say if you shecht it for entirely for arelim, it's pasal. Avol zrika, but when it comes to zrika, when it comes to the sprinkling of the blood of the Korban Pesach, afilu kula orla nami lo pasla. Even if you sprinkle and have in mind totally for arelim, it's not a problem. V'chiteima ma'kula de zrika, and Rabbah concludes, if you're going to say, why are we so lenient by zrika? Di'ein machsheves ochlim bezrika. It must be what Rabbah is saying is correct, that the machshava that you have for who's going to eat it, the machshava you have in mind for the time of the sprinkling, that doesn't count for anything. It's not substantial, and therefore it does not create a psul. Rashi here explains Talmud lomar Zos. We learn out from Zos to say it's only shchita, not by zrika. Demashma bavoda achas hu de pasla arelis. It means to say only by one avoda is arelis a problem. V'hainu shchita, which avoda? It's the avoda of shchita. Dihi tchilo la'avodas. It's the beginning of the process of the avodas when you bring a korban, it's shechting the animal. V'hi huzkor eitzel menuyin v'ochlin k'nem mefarish. That's what's mentioned by the din of menuyin and ochlin. V'chi tema ma'kula de zrika. And if you're going to say, why should we be so lenient by zrika? The tema hai zos hashchita koi, that we assume zos goes on shchita, that's where the problems exist. But by zrika, we don't care about arelus. V'lemu'ute zrika, we exclude zrika from that psul. Hainu kula, you know what the kula is? The halo is rabi machshavas ochlin eitzel zrika. This is what Rabbah is explaining. The machshava that you have for who's going to eat it is not relevant by zrika. The shchita gali bo rachman. It's only by shchita that we care about that machshava. Hilkach mistaber. That's why it makes sense. The zos, the pasal kula arelus. The word zos, which says that there's one avoda where there's a problem. If you have in mind people who are arelim, ashchita koi goes on shchita. V'lava zrika doesn't go on zrika, because again by zrika we don't care about the machshava of who's going to eat it at that point in time. It's by the shchita where that is chal. The zos, mashma miuta, zos is an exclusion, and it's saying again the psul applies by shchita and not by the more lenient zrika. So that is how Rabbah interprets that brayso. And now Rav Chisda responds. For Rav Chisda will say to you, Adarav, on the contrary, le'idach gisa, I learned the brayso completely the opposite direction. The brayso means as follows: Talmud lomar v'chol orel. First of all, the pasuk which says v'chol orel, kula orla pasla miksasa lo pasla. If you have in mind totally for arelim, it's pasal, but partially is not a problem. That's true. Avol zrika, but that's when it comes to shchita. But when it comes to the sprinkling of the blood, it's actually more strict, according to Rav Chisda. Afilu miksasa nami pasla. Even if you have partially in mind for arelim, it's going to be a problem. And if you're going to say hu adin l'zrika, that the same should apply to zrika, the adika kula arla lo pasal, that you have to have totally in mind for arelim, otherwise it's not pasal. Talmud lomar zos, that's what the pasuk says zos. Zos is actually saying that zrika is more strict. Shchita hu de miksasa lo pasla. Only by shchita we say partial is not going to create a problem. Avol zrika, but when it comes to the sprinkling of the blood of the Korban Pesach, afilu miksasa pasla, even a little bit, even if you have in mind partial for arelim, it's going to be pasal. And if you're going to say, why is zrika so strict that it's stricter than the shchita? The answer is, de lo mikva pigul ela bezrika, because the din of pigul only applies by zrika. So you see, there is a stringency that exists by zrika, and therefore it's strict in this regard as well. And Rashi over here explains, avol zrika afilo miksasa pasal, again by zrika, even a partial thought for arelim is going to make it pasal. Hainu chumra dila. What is the chumra of zrika? What does this mean here, that pigul is the chumra of zrika? Rashi explains, de lo mekayim pigul ela bezrika. Pigul really occurs at zrika, as Rashi will explain, because it's the last of the avodas. Meaning, halacha is, let's say in any one of the 4 avodas you have in mind to eat it in the wrong time, pigulu, that is the psul of pigul, even if you in the end eat it in the proper time, just the thought to eat it outside of the proper time creates the psul. Like it says, it says you eat it, it's going to be a sin. But there's a condition on this psul. The condition is, all the rest of the avodas you have to do without any other psul. Ela o b'shtika o b'kashrus. You got to do it either quietly, do nothing, or do it b'kashrus. Al menas tochsmano, to do it in the proper time, or al menas pigul kamoser. Just say quiet, no change in thought. Avol chisha ba'achas me'avoda shalacharea psul acher. But the halacha happens to be that if in one of the subsequent avodas you have in mind a different psul, could go in, for example, chutz l'mekomo. Let's say you first think chutz l'zmano, and then in a subsequent avodah you have in mind chutz l'mekomo. You're going to eat it outside of the proper area. Shuvein bo karis. It actually takes away the karis. Kedamina bezvachim uvemenachas beperek sheni hartzah ksiva bepigol nemar lo yerotza bepigol v'nemar bechosher miyom hashmini v'hola yerotza kartzah as kosher kach hartzah as pigol martzah as kosher ad sheyikravu kol meisar bekashrus af hartzah as pigol ad sheyikravu kol meisarav o bepigol o bekashrus. Gemara basically learns out you only have the punishment of pigol if it carries through the whole way, but if you add in some other psul, it's going to be a problem. Alma lo mikva vaday shel pigol. So the point is, it doesn't vaday become pigol ela bezrika. Only at the moment of zrika she's sofa avoda, which is at the end, because it's only at that point that you know that you're going to get kares, because now you've carried through the pigol until the end of all 4 avodas. Because until you get to the zrika, there's always a doubt. Maybe you'll have some other psul in mind in the coming avoda. That will uproot the shame pigul. So that's what the Gemara means, that zrika has a certain stringency when it comes to pigul, and that's why in Rav Chisda's view, zrika is actually more chamer than shchita when it comes to having in mind partially for arelim. And now one of the assumptions of both Rabbi and Rav Chisda was that the term v'chol arel means you have to have in mind totally for arelim and nothing else, not partially, but in order to create the psul, at the time you're shechting the Korban Pesach, you have to have in mind completely that arelim will be eating from this Korban Pesach. And that was learned from v'chol arel. So on that, Rav Ashi questions that limud. Ma'askif lo Rav Ashi. Rav Ashi asks, Mimai, how do you know to interpret the brisa in this fashion? Mimai dahai v'chol arel kula mashma. How do you even know that the term v'chol arel means entirely? You have to have in mind totally for arelim. That's not necessarily the mashmos of that pasuk. Dilma hai v'chol arel mashma kol du arla. Maybe v'chol arel would imply any amount of having in mind arla, meaning any amount of arelim that you have in mind that are going to eat is going to create a psul, and then you can interpret the brisa. That's what you would have thought, and that's what the zos is coming to say. Kasav rachmana zos. That's what the pasuk is saying when it says zos. Kasav rachmana zos. The adi ika kula arla lo pasla. The zos is telling you, no, you have to have in mind entirely for arelim, otherwise it's not possible. And that really is more the simple reading of the brisa, because the brisa simply says Talmud lomar zos, going on the issue of whether you have to have in mind totally for arelim to create the psul, or even partially. So that would be a much more simple way to read the brisa. Lo shna b'shchita v'lo shna b'zrika. And if you read it that way, then you're not making any distinctions between Shechita and Zrika. Again, both Rabba and Rav Chisda are separating Zrika from Shechita, and it's just a question of whether Zrika is more lenient or whether it's stricter, but they're making a distinction. Who says you read the Brisa that way? Maybe there is no difference between Shechita and Zrika. Elama Rav Ashi, rather Rav Ashi says, Rav Chisda v'Rabba, when it comes to the argument between Rav Chisda and Rabba, and we'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Samech Beis Amud Aleph.